nirvana were existent, nirvana would be compounded. A non-compounded existent does not exist anywhere. All empirical phenomena are compounded. But being compounded involves phenomena in the round of samsara. For since the recognition of compounds as unitary phenomena demands conventions of aggregation, to be compounded is, ipso facto, to have a merely conventional existence. And it is the treatment of merely conventional, nominally existent phenomena as inherently existent entities that generates samsara. That is because from the standpoint of Buddhist soteriological theory, the foundation of suffering, the basic condition of samsara, is craving, and the foundation of craving is the root delusion of taking to be inherently existent and so worthy of being craved that which is merely conventionally or nominally existent. We are hence trapped in samsara exactly to the extent that we mistake the conventionally existent as inherently existent. So given the contrast between nirvana and samsara and the fact that everything in samsara is compounded, nirvana cannot be compounded. So it is not existent, even conventionally.
6. If nirvana were existent, how could nirvana be nondependent? A nondependent existent does not exist anywhere. Samsara and dependent arising go hand in hand. For a phenomenon to be dependent is for it to be impermanent and for it to be subject to destruction. See the discussion in chapter 15, nirvana is supposed to be beyond all this. It is, by definition, liberation from all that characterizes samsara. So again, nirvana cannot be a conventionally existent entity. It is important to see that there is a sense in which nirvana is dependent and a sense in which it is independent, and these are not contradictory. Nirvana is achieved in dependence upon the practice of the path and the accumulation of wisdom and merit. But once attained, inasmuch as from the standpoint of nirvana there are no entities at all, there is nothing on which nirvana can be said to depend. In this sense it is non-dependent. But all of this raises the obvious possibility that nirvana is simply not real at all, that it is completely non-existent. This possibility is considered and rejected in the next two verses.
7. If nirvana were not existent, how could it be appropriate for it to be non-existent? Where nirvana is not existent, it cannot be a non-existent. To say that nirvana possesses the positive property of non-existence is not coherent either. For then there would be nothing to which the predicate, non-existent, could in fact apply. Note the difference between saying, in the sense relevant here, nirvana is non-existent and Santa Claus does not exist. The latter, Nagarjuna would certainly agree, is not only coherent but true. But in explaining the semantics of the latter, we can posit a concept of Santa Claus and interpret the sentence as asserting that that concept is not instantiated. But when, in trying to characterize nirvana, one is tempted to say that it is a non-existent, this is in response to the difficulty we have just noted in asserting that nirvana in fact exists. The temptation is to assert then that it is real, but has some kind of ghostly reality as a substratum of the property non-existent. But that is simply incoherent, an attempt to have it both ways. So the predicate, does not exist, cannot, in this case, even be applied. If there is no nirvana at all, there is no such basis of predication. Even this apparently negative discourse about nirvana is then blocked, to the degree that it is taken literally as positive attribution of a negative predicate.
8. If nirvana were not existent, how could nirvana be non-dependent? Whatever is non-dependent is not non-existent. Moreover, Nagarjuna reminds us, one of the reasons that we rejected the view that nirvana is an entity in the first place is that it is non-dependent. The latter assertion is, of course, intended in a merely negative sense, a denial of the possibility of characterizing nirvana as dependent, or of recognizing dependent phenomena or dependency from the standpoint of nirvana. But to the extent that we can make sense of non-existence as a positive attribute, it would have to be the attribute of something. And as we have seen especially in chapters 7, XXII, and Ziv, entities can only be conceived as dependent. So if something is non-dependent, it can't also be a real non-existent. In the next two verses, Nagarjuna reframes the problem about the ontological status of nirvana in preparation for consideration of the final two tetralemma possibilities for nirvana, that it is both existent and non-existent, and that it is neither existent nor non-existent.
9. That which comes and goes is dependent and changing. That, when it is not dependent and changing, is taught to be nirvana. 10. The teacher has spoken of relinquishing becoming and dissolution. Therefore, it makes sense that nirvana is neither existent nor non-existent. Nirvana is here again explicitly characterized only by contrast with samsara. While it therefore cannot be an entity of the kind with which samsara is populated, it is, as the release from samsara, not completely non-existent. So it can neither be conceived of conventionally or ultimately as a thing, nor coherently asserted not to exist. In fact, as XXV 9 emphasizes with eloquence, the very same world is samsara or nirvana, dependent upon one's perspective. When one perceives the constant arising and ceasing of phenomena, one perceives samsara. When all reification is abandoned, that world and one's mode of living in it becomes nirvana. Nagarjuna now considers the possibility that nirvana is both existent and non-existent.
11. If nirvana were both existent and non-existent. Passing beyond would, impossibly, be both existent and non-existent. This would entail that it is contradictory. And it is absurd to assign anything contradictory properties. Moreover, having seen that each of the conjuncts is individually impossible, their conjunction, even were it not a conjunction of contradictories, could certainly not be coherent. In particular, we don't want to say that one does and does not pass into nirvana upon release from samsara. 12. If nirvana were both existent and non-existent. Nirvana would not be non-dependent, since it would depend on both of these. But since both existent and non-existent entities are dependent, as Nagarjuna has argued in XXV 6, 8, if nirvana were both existent and non-existent, it would be doubly dependent. It would depend both on existent and non-existent phenomena.
13. How could nirvana be both existent and non-existent? Nirvana is uncompounded. Both existence and non-existence are compounded. Moreover, not only are existence compounded, that is made up of parts or given rise to by causes, but genuine non-existence are compounded as well. Their non-existence is determined by the nature of other things. If real, they would be composed of parts. A non-existent elephant is composed of a non-existent trunk, tusks, and so forth. 14. How could nirvana be both existent and non-existent? These two cannot be in the same place. Like light and darkness. This verse simply sums up the results of the previous three. There is simply no way to avoid manifest contradiction if one takes this horn of the tetralemma. Nagarjuna now considers the final possibility that nirvana is neither existent nor non-existent. 1. 15. Nirvana is said to be neither existent nor non-existent. If the existent and the non-existent were established, this would be established.